March 1941, Bletchley Park, England. In a quiet room filled with cigarette smoke and ticking clocks, a 19-year-old woman studies a naval message no one else wants. The symbols repeat. A single phrase appears twice. Outside, Britain prepares for invasion. Inside, Mavis Batey makes one decision that will never be credited, never celebrated, and never spoken aloud. How did a forgotten girl break the code that stopped Hitler from crossing the Channel? At 19, she was not supposed to be decisive. She had no rank, no authority, no reputation. At Bletchley Park, she was one of hundreds of young recruits trained to sit quietly, read endlessly, and doubt themselves. Yet in early 1941, a single Italian naval transmission landed on her desk, dismissed by others as routine traffic, poorly secured, not worth precious time. She noticed what others didn't. A repeated phrase, a predictable courtesy, the kind of linguistic habit sailors used when they believed no one was listening. She treated the message not as mathematics, but as language, habit, human error. Within hours, the cipher gave way. What emerged was not a tactical footnote. It was a strategic warning. The decrypted messages revealed coordination between the Italian Navy and German forces in the Mediterranean, exposing how the Axis planned to control sea lanes and support a larger operation still forming in Berlin. The information fed directly into Allied naval planning, weakening the illusion that Britain stood alone and blind. Historians would later connect these breakthroughs to a wider consequence: the erosion of confidence behind Germany's invasion plans. Operation Sea Lion depended on certainty, timing, and naval dominance. What Bletchley quietly removed was certainty. There were no cheers, no announcements, no public acknowledgement. The result of her work vanished into classified reports, stamped, filed, and buried. For decades, the story would be told without her name. And that raises a question history avoided for a long time. How many turning points were shaped by people the world was never meant to notice? Britain did not slide into war. It was dragged. By the late 1930s, the country was bracing itself for something it could sense, but not yet name. Air raid sirens were tested in daylight. Gas masks were distributed to school children. Newspapers spoke in cautious language, but fear lived between the lines. This was the world Mavis Batey entered as she came of age. She was born into a household that valued intellect over status. Books mattered. Languages mattered. Curiosity was encouraged quietly, without spectacle. As a student, she showed a natural sensitivity to structure and meaning, especially in foreign languages. She did not treat words as symbols to be memorized, but as habits shaped by culture, rank, and emotion. This skill would later prove decisive, though no one could have predicted it then. When war began, Britain faced a problem few civilians fully understood. It was not only outgunned and outnumbered, it was blind. Enemy intentions moved through the air as radio signals, encrypted, relentless, unreadable. To fight back, the country needed minds more than muscles. Youth became an advantage. Young people questioned assumptions. They worked faster. They noticed patterns older eyes ignored. Bletchley Park became the quiet center of this effort. Officially, it did not exist. Those recruited were told almost nothing. They signed secrecy forms that would follow them for life. What they found was not heroism, but monotony. Long hours, endless strings of letters, pressure without recognition, failure measured in silence. Mavis arrived as one of the youngest. She did not wear a uniform that inspired confidence. She did not command a room. She listened. She watched. She learned how senior cryptanalysts argued, how they abandoned problems that seemed unproductive, how hierarchy shaped attention. Some codes were treated as vital. Others were ignored, considered secondary, even beneath notice. Italian naval traffic fell into that category. The prevailing belief was simple. The German enigma was the real prize. Everything else was distraction. Time was limited. Resources were stretched thin. This logic shaped what was valued and what was quietly pushed aside. For a 19-year-old newcomer, this hierarchy mattered. It determined what she was allowed to question and what she was expected to accept. Outside Bletchley, the stakes were brutally clear. Britain stood alone. France had fallen. German aircraft crossed the Channel daily. An invasion was not theoretical. It was rehearsed openly. The country prepared for beaches lined with obstacles, civilians trained for resistance, and a future that might end in occupation. Inside Bletchley, none of that noise penetrated the rooms where codes were studied. The war was abstract. It arrived as paper, ink, patterns, errors. That separation was dangerous. It allowed small decisions to carry enormous weight. Mavis did not yet know that she was standing near one of those decisions. She only knew that something about the messages she was reading did not feel random. And in a place where intuition was rarely rewarded, that quiet discomfort would soon matter more than training. Bletchley Park did not feel like the center of a war. There were no maps on the walls, no flags, no speeches. What it felt like was pressure without movement. Rows of desks, lamps burning late into the night, paper stacked, discarded, res-tacked. The soundscape was mechanical and human at once. Typewriters clacking, chairs scraping, clocks reminding everyone that time was the enemy. This was a different kind of battlefield. No explosions, no medals, only mistakes and the consequences they carried elsewhere. Inside the system, not all codes were equal. Attention followed prestige. The German Enigma machines consumed most of it. They were complex, feared, and already infamous. Breaking them promised dramatic results. Italian naval ciphers, by contrast, were treated as crude, less sophisticated, less urgent. Messages from the Regia Marina were often routed to junior analysts, used as training material, or postponed indefinitely. That decision created a blind spot. Italian naval communications were not isolated. They were woven into Axis strategy. Ships moved in coordination. Supplies crossed the Mediterranean. German plans relied on Italian positioning and timing. Yet, because the cipher appeared weaker, it was assumed to be less important. Weakness was mistaken for irrelevance. Mavis found herself assigned to this neglected stream. There was no announcement, no ceremony, just a quiet shift of paper across a desk. For someone her age, this was not an honor. It was a side task, something to be done carefully, but without expectation. She approached it differently. Where others searched for mechanical solutions, she listened for human ones. She read the messages as if they were written to be understood, not defeated. Naval officers repeated themselves. They followed etiquette. They used familiar phrases when closing transmissions, even under encryption. Habits survived fear. One phrase appeared, then appeared again. In a place trained to distrust coincidence, repetition mattered. But repetition alone was not enough. She needed context, language, rank, routine. She began mapping likely phrases onto likely situations, not guessing blindly, but narrowing possibilities. Each assumption was tested, rejected, refined. This was slow work. There was no certainty, only probability. And probability was a fragile thing to defend in a room where senior analysts expected results, not instincts. Mavis did not announce a breakthrough. She worked quietly, building confidence one line at a time. When the cipher finally yielded, the reaction was not celebration. It was verification, rechecking, cross-referencing. Could this be right? Was it coincidence? Could a 19-year-old newcomer have found something others missed? But the messages aligned. Movements made sense. Timelines matched. What emerged was a clearer picture of Axis naval coordination, and with it, a clearer understanding of how fragile German plans truly were. The invasion of Britain depended on dominance at sea. That dominance was already compromised. Information moved upward, stripped of its origin. Reports were written, decisions adjusted, naval planning changed course. The effect was immediate, though invisible. Mavis returned to her desk. No one told her she had altered the trajectory of a war. No one could. Secrecy was absolute. Credit was irrelevant. What mattered was that the work continued, because more messages were coming and time was still running out. This was how victories happened in the Shadow War. Quietly, anonymously, without witnesses. And this one was only beginning. The Italian naval cipher was never meant to collapse under pressure. It was not crude by accident. It was crude because its users believed themselves safe. German Enigma absorbed Allied attention, resources, and fear. Italian communications moved beneath that shadow, underestimated, rarely prioritized, and dangerously predictable. That predictability was its flaw. The message that changed everything did not announce itself as important. It arrived like hundreds of others. Routine, formal, administrative. A transmission between naval commands, sent in confidence, wrapped in layers of encryption that suggested control. To most analysts, it was background noise. What made it different was repetition. A phrase appeared at the beginning, then again at the end. Not identical, but familiar enough to suggest habit rather than coincidence. Naval etiquette mattered. Rank mattered. Officers closed messages the way they were trained to, even when secrecy demanded otherwise. Under stress, people clung to routine. Mavis focused on that instinct. She did not start with machines or complex assumptions. She began with context. Who was sending the message? To whom? Under what circumstances? Italian naval officers followed formal conventions, especially when communicating movements and confirmations. Certain phrases were used so frequently they became invisible. Courtesy survived encryption. She tested possibilities slowly. One phrase narrowed into another. A likely opening suggested a likely closing. Each guess reduced the cipher's resistance. This was not a sudden revelation, but a careful erosion. The kind that only happens when patience meets familiarity. As the code began to give way, structure emerged. Coordinates, timings, references to convoys and patrol zones. These were not abstract signals. They described movement, supply, support, the lifelines of a larger plan. The decrypted traffic revealed coordination between Italian naval forces and German strategic objectives in the Mediterranean. Ships were positioned to secure routes. Resources were aligned to support a future phase of operations. What seemed regional was connected to something far larger. The invasion of Britain, codenamed Operation Sea Lion, depended on certainty, air superiority, naval control, predictable supply lines. Every variable mattered. What the decrypted messages exposed was fragility. The Axis plan was not airtight. It relied on cooperation that could be disrupted. That disruption began quietly. Information flowed upward through Bletchley's internal channels. Analysts verified it independently. Naval intelligence cross-checked reports with known movements. Patterns matched. The threat assessment changed. German confidence, once projected as absolute, was now seen as conditional. Allied planners adjusted accordingly. Convoy routes were altered. Naval deployments shifted. Intelligence briefings grew more precise. The channel was no longer an unknown. It was mapped through human error, habit, and a cipher that should have remained intact. This was not a single victory. It was a cascade. As Italian communications continued to be read, the illusion of Axis coordination weakened. What had once appeared unified now showed seams. Delays, miscommunication, overconfidence. Each decrypted message stripped away another layer of certainty. For Germany, certainty was everything. Hitler's invasion plans depended not only on force, but on belief. Belief that the enemy was blind. Belief that timing was controllable. Belief that the channel could be crossed without catastrophic loss. Those beliefs eroded silently. By late 1941, Operation Sea Lion was no longer a question of when, but whether. The decision to delay, then abandon the invasion, rested on many factors. Air losses, logistical strain, shifting priorities toward the Eastern Front. But underlying all of it was intelligence. Clearer pictures, fewer assumptions. The code that should not have been broken had done its damage. Inside Bletchley Park, none of this was framed as heroism. There were no briefings explaining consequences. Analysts were shielded from outcomes. They were told only to continue, to move on to the next message, to forget the last one. Mavis did exactly that. She returned to her work. More ciphers, more paper, more hours. The significance of what she had done remained abstract, buried beneath classification and necessity. Even if she suspected the scale, she could not speak it aloud. Not to colleagues, not to family, not to herself. This was the cost of the Shadow War. Victory without memory, impact without acknowledgement. And yet, the most dangerous moment had passed. The channel would not be crossed. The invasion would not come. History would record the decision as strategic, rational, inevitable. It would not record the 19-year-old who read a message differently, and in doing so, removed certainty from the enemy's hands. By mid-1941, the question was no longer whether Britain was threatened. It was how close the threat truly was. On paper, Germany still possessed the capacity to strike. Aircraft numbers remained formidable. Troops were positioned. Barges were assembled along occupied coastlines. To the public, invasion felt imminent, suspended only by luck and weather. Inside intelligence rooms, the picture was changing. The steady flow of decrypted Italian naval messages did something no single report could. It replaced speculation with structure. Movements that once appeared random now formed patterns. Convoys aligned with schedules. Escorts matched supply demands. The Mediterranean was no longer a fog. It was readable, and that readability exposed weakness. Axis coordination, often assumed to be seamless, was anything but. Italian naval limitations strained German planning. Delays compounded. Fuel shortages appeared where none were expected. Communications revealed hesitation, requests for clarification, repeated confirmations. Signs of uncertainty crept into what had once been confident transmissions. For an invasion as complex as Operation Sea Lion, hesitation was lethal. The plan depended on speed and synchronization. Barges crossing the channel would be vulnerable for hours. Air cover had to be absolute. Naval interference had to be minimal. Any disruption increased the risk of catastrophe. Intelligence now showed that disruption was not hypothetical. It was already happening. British naval planners adjusted in silence. Deployment strategies shifted. Defensive priorities hardened. The channel, once feared as a corridor of invasion, became a controlled space. Not because Britain had grown stronger overnight, but because the enemy had grown predictable. This was the quiet pivot. No announcement marked it. No order declared that history had changed direction. Decisions were revised incrementally, justified through caution and contingency. On the German side, confidence eroded. On the British side, certainty grew. By the end of 1941, the invasion plan stalled. Attention turned eastward. Resources were redirected. Operation Sea Lion faded from immediate consideration, then from urgency, then from reality. The channel was never crossed. From the outside, this appeared inevitable. From the inside, it was fragile. A sequence of small corrections, guided by intelligence that did not exist months earlier. At Bletchley Park, the work continued uninterrupted. No one gathered to reflect on what had been prevented. There was no moment of release. Messages still arrived. Clocks still ticked. Analysts still leaned over desks under artificial light. Mavis did not know when the danger passed. She could only infer it indirectly, through shifts in traffic, changes in tone, the absence of urgency where urgency once lived. The war spoke to her in negative space. This was the nature of the climax she had helped create. It was not loud. It did not resolve in triumph. It dissolved. A threat removed not by force, but by knowledge. History would later debate why the invasion never happened. Air losses, strategic miscalculations, competing priorities. All of these mattered, but none of them stood alone. Behind each factor was intelligence. And behind a portion of that intelligence was a cipher that had been underestimated, assigned casually, and broken quietly by someone history did not think to name. The moment passed without witnesses. That was its power. When the immediate danger receded, nothing changed on the surface. There was no signal that the war had tilted away from catastrophe. No line was drawn between before and after. Bletchley Park remained what it had always been, a place of routine urgency, where yesterday's breakthroughs were irrelevant to today's problems. Secrecy was absolute. Everyone understood it without being reminded. The work could not be discussed, not in detail, not in outline, not in implication. What had been read, what had been prevented, and what had been lost all belonged to the same locked space. Silence was not a policy. It was a condition of survival. For those who worked there, the end of a crisis did not feel like relief. It felt like absence. Messages slowed. Patterns shifted. The tone of intercepted communications changed, subtly at first. Where there had been insistence, there was now caution. Where there had been confidence, there was delay. The absence of invasion was not announced. It was inferred. After the war, that silence hardened into habit. Life moved forward. Careers were built elsewhere. Families formed. The skills honed in secrecy were folded back into ordinary existence. For many codebreakers, including those whose work had been decisive, the war became something that could not be shared, even as memory demanded it. Public history took a different path. Victory was attributed to visible forces, pilots, commanders, battles with names and dates. Intelligence appeared only as an abstract contribution, mentioned briefly, if at all. Individual names were unnecessary. Stories without spectacle rarely survive. Decades passed before fragments of the truth emerged. Files were declassified slowly, reluctantly. The shape of the hidden war began to appear, but even then, credit was diffuse. Systems were praised. Institutions acknowledged. People remained largely anonymous. Recognition, when it came, arrived late. It arrived quietly. By then, the urgency that once justified silence had faded, but the habit remained. For those who had lived with it, acknowledgement felt almost intrusive, as if speaking aloud might undo something carefully held together. This was the final cost of the shadow war. Not danger, not fear, but erasure. History remembered that Britain was not invaded. It remembered strategies and outcomes. What it struggled to remember was how close that outcome had been to reversal, and how easily it might have gone unnoticed. Some victories leave no monuments, only questions. When the full scope of the code-breaking war finally emerged, it did so without drama. There were no revelations that shattered public understanding overnight. Instead, there was accumulation, files released, timelines adjusted, assumptions quietly corrected. Only then did certain names surface, and even then, without urgency. Mavis Batey's contribution did not fit the way history preferred to tell the story. She had not commanded troops or stood before microphones. She had not appeared in photographs that could anchor memory. Her work existed in inference, in decisions altered elsewhere, in disasters that never happened. What she left behind was not a record of action, but a record of absence. No invasion, no occupation, no beaches turned into battlegrounds. The channel remained a barrier, not a grave. That absence is difficult to celebrate, and yet it is precisely where her legacy lives. In the reminder that history does not only move forward through visible force, but through attention, through the refusal to ignore something simply because it appears secondary, through the courage to trust insight in a system that rewards conformity. Her story forces an uncomfortable question. How many turning points were shaped by individuals history never learned to name? How many lives were redirected by decisions made in rooms without witnesses, by people who never expected recognition? The answers are not neat. They resist numbers and ceremonies. But they matter, because when history forgets how it was protected, it risks misunderstanding what truly keeps it standing. Not only strength, not only weapons, but minds willing to look where others do not, and to act before certainty becomes catastrophe. This is what Mavis Batey represents. Not a forgotten heroine in need of rescue, but a reminder of how fragile the present once was, and how quietly it was preserved.